Ukraine now, and many are suggesting if Donald Trump were still president, this invasion of Ukraine would not have happened. Well, let's get the professional view of George Papadopoulos, the former foreign policy advisor to Donald Trump. George is also the author of the best-selling book, Deep State Target: How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump. George Papadopoulos, welcome to GB News.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
And George, this is a question that's resonating around newsrooms across the world. Would this have happened under the watch of Donald Trump? What's your view? You know the guy intimately well.
Well, let's first look at who Vladimir Putin is. Vladimir Putin is a man of war. He's a man of nationalism. And Vladimir Putin has actually had a very consistent approach, or vision, if you will, towards Ukraine ever since he ascended to power. He's gone as far as calling Ukraine part of Russia and one of the greatest geopolitical losses after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But one thing that Vladimir Putin was very careful not to do were military incursions into Ukraine. That all changed in 2014 initially, when Joe Biden was vice president. That's when Vladimir Putin took the opportunity to seize Crimea and later annex it, and later create the situation that we initially had in the east with Donbass. Moving forward, just about 72 hours ago, as Joe Biden is now president of the United States of America, now Vladimir Putin has initiated a full-scale war, and he's on the footsteps of Kiev, where the city will likely fall in the next 48 hours. Now, the reason I put this into context is because in the American media and around the world, they attempted to characterize Donald Trump and his associates as some sort of Putin cronies. Now, forget to mention that Vladimir Putin was kept in check during Donald Trump's administration because Donald Trump understood that individuals like Vladimir Putin only understand American resolve and American strength. And by resolve and strength, he invoked the doctrine of peace through strength, something that President Reagan did during the Cold War to keep the Soviet Union in check. And this is exactly why Donald Trump unleashed America's energy prowess upon the world to help wean Europe off of Russia's gas, which, as we now know, has really ossified Russia and Germany and really has created this stalemate where the EU can't even come together to in terms of a common sanctions package. So I really just think that the people need to understand the facts and to really understand that President Trump was the toughest president in modern history on Russia. And Vladimir Putin saw that, he felt it, and that's why he was kept in check.
Tom, can we bring our panel in? Because I want to widen this discussion if we can. Because what we've got to do is get to the bottom of whether or not America is actually culpable in what has happened in Ukraine. I mean, let me put that to you, first of all, George. I mean, do you think that Joe Biden set the scene, set the tone for America's attitude to international affairs with that botched departure from Afghanistan?
No doubt. Our friends and foes alike watched America's completely botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. And it wasn't simply a botched American withdrawal. The UK fought and shed blood and treasure along with their American colleagues in Afghanistan. They did the same thing in Iraq. And to see our president just abandon the country and really scorn and create this debilitating image of the American armed forces around the world, our foes like China and Russia watched that. They understood that the American public under Joe Biden did not have confidence that this commander-in-chief can lead American forces around the world after this botched withdrawal. And I think that's exactly why you do see both China now and Russia attempting to make simultaneous moves on both Taiwan and Ukraine.
Well, that's a really interesting answer. George, my panel are ready now. We've got Peter Lloyd, Hilary Freeman and Robert Fox, who is the defence editor at the London Evening Standard. Peter Lloyd, do you have confidence in Joe Biden as the so-called leader of the free world at a time of international crisis?
In a word, Mark, I would say no. We recently saw footage of President Biden snoozing at a World Conference, and I think that is a wonderful metaphor for how he behaves in the White House. He's practically been sleeping through his presidency thus far, and I think that Russia and China have been looking on and laughing at what is the leader of the free world. And I think what we're seeing now is the fallout of that mismanagement of the US. And I think him and Kamala Harris are both equally to blame for the situation we find ourselves in now. I think it's an embarrassment for the Western world.
Hillary Freeman, you believe that Vladimir Putin is unhinged. What's your assessment of Joe Biden?
I think Joe Biden probably got in because just as a reaction against Trump. I don't think he's great. I think he is just too old, really, and doesn't seem to be doing anything. Sorry, Peter. I just think but I don't think it's just Biden. I think, look at our government too. We're a mess, and I think the whole of the West just looks really, really weak now. There is no strong leadership, so it's not just Joe Biden.
Yes, and Robert Fox, we spoke earlier. You're not convinced that a different leadership in the White House would have provoked a different outcome?
No.
Why so?
It's very interesting to hear George Papadopoulos say that. Look, the seeds for the disaster in Afghanistan were sowed with the Doha deal for the pullout. You cannot say that Team Trump is absolutely innocent of this. And under Trump, which Biden has continued in a way, is the detachment of America from so many aspects of the North Atlantic, that is pan-European, going to the edges of Eurasia, which they don't like, security deal. There were two crucial treaties, the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty and the Conventional European Force Treaty, which Putin tore up and Trump didn't do anything to restore. So this is part of a continuum. Can I just finish? That Churchill's great advisor, Pug Ismay, General Ismay, who became the first Secretary General of NATO, said famously, the purpose of NATO, look, we're talking 1949 and 1952, when Ismay actually became the first Secretary General, it's to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. Well, one thing that Putin is, and I will call him Putin, we call Trump, and whatever, sorry, Mike, correspondent, that is the shorthand of journalism. But one thing that Vladimir Putin has done is he is moving the Russian sphere of influence where he thinks it should be, which is into Ukraine, because he does not want a neutral and a potential enemy going on the borders of Russia, and I don't think Donald Trump would have done anything to have stopped that. So we've got the Americans withdrawing, the Germans, the most powerful economy in Western Europe, absolutely at sixes and sevens over this, and the Russians in. As they used to say when I took exams a million years ago, and I come in like Biden, by the way, he's only 18 months older than me. I'm in the too old bracket too, so you don't even have to take any notice of me. But you have to discuss this prospect. The apparatus for security and cooperation, not just in Europe, it's not bald old white men like me. It is actually how we do the governance of the world. But because behind this, it isn't just NATO. It's a thing called the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which states in its founding act, which is the Helsinki Final Act, you do not invade or breach an international border by violence, and individuals and groups and ethnic minorities are allowed self-determination. That is an extension of the United Nations Charter. They are all up for grabs. That's what we're saying. I do agree with you, and I do agree with all the participants about leadership. But boy, going back to the Marx Brothers and Duck Soup, I don't like the cult of the big leader either.
So what do you think, George? Where does America go from here?
I think first of all, we have to look at the politics in America currently. Joe Biden just hit a fresh low in approval ratings this month before the Ukraine invasion by Russia. We're going into the midterm elections in this country in the next 10 months, in which the Republicans today have a tremendous momentum, including a 40-year high in terms of polling numbers going into midterm. So it's more likely than not that the Republicans will be taking over Congress, possibly the Senate as well, in a matter of just 10 months or so. And what Joe Biden has to calculate is how much this war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, impacts the American taxpayer. We do understand that there is an inflation issue going on, a raging pandemic, an open border, domestic discord, and now a foreign policy disaster. So if Joe Biden miscalculates and you do see American lives lost in this conflict, or oil prices continue to skyrocket, as we have seen that they're highest in the last 8 years, and the American consumer feels that in their pocketbook, in their wallets, you're going to see his approval rating continue to decline, diminish. And this is really going to probably impact how the American president does operate on the global stage. He's already abdicated the American traditional leadership role. I don't know what else that could possibly happen unless we do see a potential Russian invasion of a NATO country. And in that case, we really are in uncharted territory. And it's something that I don't even want to predict what might happen in that case. Should Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, or one of the Baltic states be invaded along with Ukraine at this point?
Yeah, of course. If a single Russian boot steps on NATO soil, it is a prelude, isn't it, to World War III. You obviously had the ear of Donald Trump when he was at the White House in relation to foreign policy affairs. You've written a book about your time with the president. How do you think he'd be handling the situation now if Putin had entered Ukraine on his watch, which is the view taken by Robert Fox? What would Trump be doing now? What would he be saying, and what would his actions be that would mark the approach out as different from that of Biden?
Sorry, I was disconnected. If you could please repeat the question.
Sure. What would Donald Trump do right now if he was in the White House? So Putin's invaded. What does Trump do you think?
I think that President Trump had set the conditions to prevent this invasion. And it's very simple. What President Trump had done regarding the U.S., Ukraine, Russia relationship is that he kept sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany to prevent it from even being completed, which it was just completed this past September after the Biden administration waived those sanctions. And by unleashing the American energy renaissance, it really did allow the European consumer to wean themselves off of Russian gas, and it emboldened them to stand up more so against Putin. And the final thing that President Trump did, which I think prevented this instability, is he forced NATO to continue to bolster their spending on defense. This is something that President Trump, while a candidate and president, continued to pound the table about, that only a few members of NATO spend 2% of their defense expenditure on defense, and this was untenable. He put them in line. Russia understood that. And I think that if Russia did decide to do exactly what they did right now, that you would see President Trump leading the entire NATO alliance in Washington, D.C., to discuss how they will arm the Ukrainian resistance, impose tremendous sanctions to cripple the Russian economy, and to assure that they set a pretext for this to never happen again. And that is to point the finger directly at China if they have any motivations to go into Taiwan.
George, briefly, I confidently predict that the victor of the next US presidential elections will be a Republican, come what may, because I think things on the world stage are going to go from bad to worse. I think American society is divided and falling apart, and the economy is tanking. So I think a Republican gets the top job. But what is the percentage chance of it being Donald Trump one more time?
Looking at the most recent relevant polls, Donald Trump is the front runner in terms of clinching a nomination should he decide to run. By all indication, he will announce that he will be running for president should the Republicans take over Congress. So I think it will either be President Trump in 2024 Or you might see another dark horse like Governor DeSantis out of Florida, who's also an incredibly popular governor, Republican. He's young, dynamic.
Yeah.
He has prescriptions to a lot of the social issues which are really plaguing America today, and that's really increases popularity among the Republican base. But like I said, Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner if he decides to run.
George, a joy to have you on the programme once again. George Papadopoulos is the author of the best-selling book, Deep State Target, How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump. And George has advised Donald Trump on foreign affairs for many years. George, speak again soon. Thanks to my